Good afternoon and welcome to today's college readout on the European semester package, the spring package, which the college adopted today. I have the pleasure of having with me Vice President Dombrovskis, Commissioner Thyssen and Commissioner Moscovici. They will give you an introduction of what the college spoke about today, and we will then be ready to take your questions. Vice President Dombrovskis.
Good afternoon, everyone. Indeed, as Annika just said, we spoke today mostly on Spring 2019 European semester package. But before giving in details on this, I will tell you quickly about two other points which we had on agenda today. First, today the Commission has adopted the EU's draft budget for 2020. We have proposed 168.3 billion euros for 2020 for a more competitive European economy and for solidarity and security in the EU and beyond. This budget is the seventh and last one under the current 2014-2020 multi-annual EU budget. It's designed to optimize funding for existing programs as well as new initiatives and boost European added value in line with the Juncker Commission's priorities. The budget for 2020 has identified following priority areas: competitive economy and young people, strengthening security and solidarity in the EU, climate change, and several others. For example, 21% of the overall proposed budget for 2020 will go to tackle climate change. This aligns with the ambitious target of spending 20% of EU's current multi-annual budget on activities that address climate change. So our colleague Günther Oettinger will address European Parliament on this topic this afternoon, jointly with members of European Parliament Arthuis, Hohlmeier and Manka. And they will have a press conference today at 2:45 in front of the meeting room ASP 5G3. We also heard from First Vice President Timmermans, who informed us about ongoing legislative files that could still be delivered before the end of the mandate of this Commission. Altogether, this Commission has made 474 legislative proposals, which includes 44 proposals presented by previous Commission. Of these, 351 proposals have been adopted or agreed by European Parliament and or Council during the present mandate. This means that 167 proposals remain to be agreed at this point, and we estimate that about half of those have a chance of agreement before 31st of October. So the College decided to work hard until the very last strand of this mandate to get our proposals adopted. And this brings me now to the European semester. This is the last spring package for this Commission, so maybe it's a chance to take stock of how far we have come. The European economy is in much better shape than when we found it. 7 years of uninterrupted growth, investment is recovering, public finances are improving, employment is at record levels. Some 12.6 million jobs have been created since 2014. And this is widespread in spite of the recent slowdown and increased risks. All EU countries are set to grow this year and into the next. It shows that our economic policies, boosting investment, stepping up structural reforms and conducing responsible fiscal policies, that this set of policies is working. But unfortunately, it's not the case across all member states. Some member states have not used the good economic times to build fiscal buffers and implement necessary reforms. And there is still much to do to make our economies more competitive and resilient. For all member states, new challenges lie ahead. We need to transform our economies to make sure digitization, population aging and transition to the climate neutral economy don't undermine our strong European social model. Indeed, making growth inclusive has been our focus for several years, so that it also benefits everyone, including the most vulnerable. This strong social dimension is to be maintained. Marianne will talk more on this. And let me point to two novelties in this year's country-specific recommendations. First, a greater focus on investment. A dedicated country-specific recommendation identifies priority investment needs for each country, be it for private or public investments. We pay special attention to addressing regional and territorial disparities, and these investment needs should be addressed by public and private sources, including EU funding. Second, for several countries, namely Bulgaria, Denmark, Estonia, Latvia, Malta and Sweden, we propose country-specific recommendations in relation to anti-money laundering. Failure to address shortcomings in AML enforcement can seriously undermine confidence in European banking sector. This is why it's a European problem and we must work on it as such. Today we also adopted a number of fiscal decisions as well as third report under enhanced surveillance for Greece. Pierre will elaborate on those cases, so let me say just a few words for three countries, Spain, Italy and Greece. Today we are proposing to abrogate excessive deficit procedure for Spain, so let me congratulate Spain. Of course, the logic of the Stability and Growth Pact is that Spain, like other member states, must continue to focus on sound public finances, precisely to avoid problems in the future. As of this year, Spain will be in the preventive arm of the pact, which means that we will look at the evolution of debt and the delivery of the required structural effort, which is expected to be at 0.65% of GDP this year and also next. On Italy, today we have published a report under Article 126.3 of the treaty, assessing the breach of the debt benchmark in 2018. It concludes that the debt criterion is not complied with and that the debt-based excessive deficit procedure is thus warranted. To be clear, today we are not opening the excessive deficit procedure. First, EU member states have to give their views on the Article 126.3 report. The Economic and Financial Committee has 2 weeks to formulate its opinion on our conclusions. But it's much more than just about the procedure. When we look at the Italian economy, we are seeing the damage recent policy choices are doing. Let me give you some examples. We estimate that interest expenditure for Italy in 2018 turned out to be higher by around 2.2 billion euros if we compare with our spring forecast. This is, I talk about 2018 spring forecast. Today, Italy pays in debt servicing as much as for the entire education system. In 2018, Italy's debt represented an average burden of 38,400 euros per inhabitant, and in addition, the average debt servicing cost per person was around 1,000 euros. Growth has come to almost a halt. The hit to confidence and higher interest rates have aggregated the impact of external factors such as global trade tensions or general slowdown in the world economy. We now expect the Italian debt ratio to rise in both 2019 and 2020 up to 135% of GDP due to the gap between interest rates and growth rates, or so-called snowball effect, but also due to declining primary surplus and underachieved privatization proceeds. We know that there is a path for recovery and growth to Italy. Other member states have already taken it with success. This path follows a renewed reform effort and not spending more when there is no fiscal space to do so. Let me also say a few words on Greece. During this Commission's mandate, Greece is amongst those countries that have implemented most reforms. Thanks to those reforms and thanks to sound fiscal policies, the country is on a path of recovery with growing employment and consumer demand. In April, following the implementation of specific commitments, the Eurogroup released the first tranche of policy contingent debt measures. However, the reform momentum has slowed in recent months. In May, Greece adopted a series of expansionary fiscal measures and announced more for later. Today's report notes that the package is costly and does not go in the right policy direction. It undoes some elements of important past programme reforms, and these new measures pose a risk to achievement of the agreed primary surplus target of 3.5% of GDP this year and beyond. To conclude, it's important not to waste the major progress made in recent years. It is a delicate exercise for Greece to return to the markets with public debt of around 180% of GDP. There is very little room for mistakes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice President.
Bonjour. Nous venons...
Good afternoon. We've just adopted the last spring package under this Commission, including country-specific recommendations and a number of reports and important fiscal decisions. And in doing this, we are assuming our responsibilities in full right to the end of our mandate. And we remain true to our initial mission of support for growth, job creation, and the need for sound public finances. There are three messages from today's package. First of all, some good news. It's the end of the EDP cycle, a cycle that started under the financial crisis. The time has come today to bring to a close the last of these procedures, the one for Spain, which was opened 10 years ago. Let me remind you, in 2011, 24 member states were covered by this procedure. And when this commission took up office in November 2014, there were still 11 under the procedure. So I would also like to express my congratulations to Spain. Your hard work has borne fruit, although we know that problems remain, in particular in relation to unemployment. But this basically marks the end of a long and difficult road, not just for Spain, but for the whole of the European Union and the Eurozone. And the decision to abrogate taken by the Commission today is a reflection of Spain's efforts. And we would encourage Spain to remain committed to sound public finances. The second important message is as follows. Through this package, we continue to offer economic and fiscal guidance to member states to ensure coordination between our economies and to make us stronger, both individually and collectively. There are targeted recommendations which focus on the specific priorities faced by individual member states in order to improve growth, to create jobs. Unemployment is still an issue, and also to ensure sustainable development, which is a challenge for the future. All those elements can be found in this package, and in spring next year, the next Commission, in picking up the baton, will have to ensure the proper implementation of these recommendations. Today, let me say once again that we are also trying to correct certain practices that are detrimental to our economies and to our society. For example, fighting money laundering in Denmark, Estonia, Latvia, Bulgaria, Malta and Sweden. Measures to preserve the independence of the judiciary and the rule of law in Cyprus and Hungary, and efforts to combat aggressive tax planning in Cyprus, Hungary, Ireland, Luxembourg, Malta and the Netherlands. This is a matter close to my heart, the whole question of aggressive tax planning. In line with the Eurozone recommendation, for the first time we've come forward with a specific recommendation for those member states who have been identified on the basis of an in-depth examination of fiscal rules, relevant economic indicators and specific country analysis. Progress varies. There is more progress in some countries than others. For example, Ireland and the Netherlands are very much on the right track, but progress is still necessary, and we want to encourage countries along that path. And the third important message from today is that today we are assuming our responsibilities vis-à-vis a number of countries who have to face very difficult but different circumstances, and this requires the intelligent but serious application of our shared rules. First of all, for Greece, this morning we adopted the third enhanced surveillance report for Greece. As you know, these quarterly reports allow us to monitor the respect of agreed fiscal targets and the implementation of reform measures. Greece, let me say once again, has started this new post-programme chapter in a positive way overall, with important success. For example, there was a budgetary surplus for the third consecutive year in 2018. Greece has gradually returned to the markets. I know that this is a pending objective for Greece, and there have been other additional measures to the tune of 970 million euros, which were implemented in April. So a lot has been done by the Greek authorities to revive the Greek economy, and I wanted to make that point clear. However, in our report, we've also identified a number of delays in implementing reform commitments, and we've also highlighted the risks in relation to the fulfillment of fiscal targets following the package of measures adopted last month. We need to be very aware of the effect of these measures over the next few months. And we need to look at the figures to be achieved in order to achieve cruising speed. The Commission will continue to help Greece to return to sustainable economic revival, and we intend to pursue the constructive dialogue that we have had with the Greek authorities over the last few years. Moving on to Hungary and Romania. Hungary and Romania have adopted an expansionist policy rather than streamlining their public finances in a favourable economic environment. A very favourable economic environment, in fact. Because previous recommendations have not been respected, we will recommend to Council the following. No effective measures have been adopted, and therefore a procedure for significant deviation should be renewed for these two countries. And this procedure would apply for 2019 and 2020. With an annual effort of 1% and 0.7% respectively. For 4 member states, we adopted reports based on Article 1263 of the treaty. This looks into reasons for the non-respect of debt and deficit criteria, either individually or together. These countries are Italy, Belgium, France, and Cyprus. In all cases, there has been a non-respect of these criteria, either separately or combined. And the analysis takes this into account for 2019 and 2020, as well as other relevant factors. For France, we have concluded that the 2 criteria have been respected. When it comes to the deficit, there has been an overshoot of the 3% limit. That's forecast for 2019, but this will be a limited overshoot, 3.1%, and temporary in nature. It will last for 1 year. And this increase is due to the replacement of the CICE, the Competitiveness Employment Tax Credit, which was adopted when I was Finance Minister, in fact, and this has been replaced by a reduction in perennial contributions. This will have a one-off impact to the tune of 0.9% in 2019. As of 2020, according to our forecast, the deficit will fall back well below 3%, down to 2.2%. And when it comes to the debt, The debt, I believe, has to be reduced, but overall France's respect of the preventive arm is deemed to be a relevant grounds for not opening a procedure. When it comes to Belgium, this is a borderline case, as we say. It's difficult to say definitively. The structural balance was neutral in 2018 and is likely to remain so in 2019, although it should be improving. And yet at the same time, debt is going down gradually, and the nominal deficit will remain well below 3%, 1.3% for this year, according to our forecasts. So these are positive developments which offset the concerns we have about the structural balance for 2018 and 2019. So no procedure.
Our report was triggered by the fact that the headline deficit reached 4.8% of GDP in 2018. However, this was entirely due to banking support measures, which were necessary to preserve financial stability in Cyprus. Moreover, for both this year and 2020, we forecast a significant budgetary surplus and also a strongly declining public debt. We have thus decided against opening an EDP, given that no further adjustment is needed and a procedure would add little value and would appear absolutely counterintuitive to citizens. Let's not be too formal. This wouldn't have made any sense. As regards Italy now, the figures have been given by Valdis. I will just say that they are problematic on two fronts. Instead of being reduced, Italy's public debt, which is a major burden on the economy, increased further from 131% to 132% of GDP. And second problematic approach, the structural deficit, which should have declined by 0.3%, according to the Council recommendation, instead widened by 0.8%, meaning there was a gap of 0.4% percentage points. This is for 2018, I recall that. Unfortunately, also for 2019, we forecast a slight worsening in the structural deficit, whereas the Council has recommended a reduction of 0.6%, and the Italian authorities had made a commitment last December to avoid any deterioration. And finally, for 2020, we forecast a large increase in the deficit, both in structural and nominal terms, to 3.5% of GDP, well above the treaty threshold. On this basis, and having examined all relevant factors, we have concluded that the debt criterion is currently not respected and that a debt-based excessive deficit procedure is warranted for Italy. Let's be clear, we're not opening today this EDP. It is now for the Council to express its views on this objective and on our analysis, which is purely factual. Pending this opinion, I see no need to speculate further at this stage, neither in the mindset, neither in the markets. Of course, as always, with all member states, we are ready to look at new data that could change this analysis. So, la mia porta rimane aperta. And for those who don't understand my Italian, I forgive them. I would say, my door is opened, ma porte est ouverte. Nous pouvons toujours.
We're happy to discuss and listen to what you have to say.
Package of our mandate, we are presenting, I think, a coherent set of recommendations to build on what we have achieved in these past 5 years and to tackle the major economic and also societal changes Europe is set to face in the coming years. In particular, we reaffirm today our commitment to an intelligent application of the Stability and Growth Pact. That means basing our decisions not on a mechanistic or legalistic or purely mechanistic or legalistic application of the rules, but on whether they are good for growth, job, and sound public finances. Thank you for your attention, and I will now hand over to Maria.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The real novelty of this year's European semester exercise is that we deepen our focus on investment. By identifying investment priorities for each member state, we operationalize how we want to streamline the use of the European funds. Many of these investment priorities can and will be supported by the cohesion funds for 2021 to 2027, and it is clear that that support can, of course, not cover everything, but we are forcefully moving towards a stronger link between the European semester and the funding, so that a part of the European budget is used to support the reforms we have agreed with member states. Today's country-specific recommendations allow us to focus on the main issues that need further attention, and almost half of them address labour market and social affairs, a further sign of how social the semester has become. I would like to focus on 5 key issues we have identified. First, employment, including quality of employment. Even though employment is at a record level, we see large differences between countries, regions, and population groups. Some regions are left behind. Temporary and atypical work is disturbingly frequent in some countries, and in-work poverty is increasing. A second one is about social protection. The rise of non-standard work and self-employment forces us to rethink how we make sure all people in work are adequately covered. An erosion of social protection leaves workers insufficiently protected and our social security poorer. Then there is also the rapidly changing world of work that demands from us to adapt and to innovate. Investing in people is key for sustainable and inclusive growth. But we also need to address inequalities in education and training, and everybody must have equal access to quality education. This includes lifelong learning for adults, otherwise we endanger the long-term prosperity of our societies. And then we have, of course, another challenge, that's the aging societies. With those aging of the population, sustainability of pensions and healthcare, also long-term care, require a hard think. We must ensure positive reforms are not retracted, costs don't balloon, and intergenerational fairness is maintained. And then finally, equality between men and women. This keeps improving, but with a persisting gender pay gap and employment gap. And this shows that it's clear that we are not yet there. The new rules on work-life balance, of course, they are a milestone that can help to improve the situation, but member states need to implement this on the ground and to complement it with affordable and quality childcare and long-term care facilities. While there is work to do, we have built a stable ground on which the next Commission can continue this effort. The employment and social outlook in Europe is developing in the right direction, with still record levels of employment, with now 241 million people in jobs in the Union. Employment is at 6.4% April this year. This is now below the lowest point attained before the crisis. The improvement is even more remarkable for young people, whose unemployment rate went from a peak of almost 24% in spring 2013 to 14.2% today, and poverty and social exclusion are going down. This shows that our policies are bearing fruit. The European Pillar of Social Rights, of course, is crucial to continue delivering. It is the basis for all future policies and investment priorities for improving working and living conditions across the European Union. Our recommendations today, those we adopted today, they are essential to build a more equal and prosperous future. They will guide the Member States in using the European cohesion money wisely in the period 2021 to 27. And of course, we call on the Member States to translate all these recommendations into action. I thank you.
Let me just briefly say that all our material is now available outside the press room and online. And without further ado, let's take your questions. I saw one from David.
Thank you, Annika. David Carretta, Radio Radicale, Italian Radio. I would have a couple of questions. I will start in French with Commissioner Moscovici. Monsieur le Commissaire, vous avez dit que...
Commissioner, you said that the door is open, and now we will have the opinion from the Economic and Finance Committee. I wanted to ask you, what should Italy do in order to avoid an excessive deficit procedure being opened? Does there have to be an amended budget?
Yes. Today, the International Monetary Fund will say that the Italian debt is a danger for the whole Eurozone. Do you agree with that evaluation? Secondly, Mr. Matteo Salvini, which is the Vice Prime Minister in Italy, is saying that he wants to change the Stability and Growth Pact rules. Do you think that it's possible today to change those rules? Thank you.
Je voudrais commencer peut-être par...
I'd perhaps like to start by running through the next steps, just to make sure everything's clear. Today, at the present time, we're not in the process of opening an excessive deficit procedure on the basis of the debt criteria. But this is a first step. This could be moving towards that first step. Now, we have the report from the Commission that will be discussed in the EFC, the Economic and Finance Committee, then by Council, which is 2 weeks to form an opinion. That's what's provided for under the treaty. If the position of the EFC is to support the Commission conclusions, then at that point there might be an EDP opened, but the Commission would in turn have to address their opinion to Italy, inform Italy and inform Council as well. On that basis, the Council may decide on whether there is an excessive deficit and might make a recommendation to Italy. And that then would lead to a procedure being opened. What I would say on that is that basically the Council will also be examining the situation. And obviously, it's also up to Italy to provide the necessary information. And it's not a question of us saying you need to do this, that, or the other. Now, we've always said that we're always ready to have an exchange, to have a discussion on factual information on the figures provided by the Italian government. So that's what would be done now. And we need to specify clearly that the door is open. Our door is open. We're there to listen. We want an exchange. And now it's up to Italy to demonstrate how we might avoid an excessive deficit procedure being triggered.
Okay, as concerns the second question, that was the whole reason why a Stability and Growth Pact was actually adopted and why European semester was introduced. It was acknowledgement that what happens in one EU member state and especially in one Eurozone member state affects others. So certainly fiscal and macroeconomic developments in member states are to extent matter of common concern, and it certainly goes also for Italy. As regards specifically debt developments, we already outlined our concerns that indeed in last year's debt in Italy is not going down, it's rather going up and forecast to go up, and we consider that Italy needs to reconsider its fiscal trajectory, put its public debt and also budget deficit clearly on downwards path. And it's first and foremost important for Italy itself, because we see that current fiscal trajectory already has created damage to Italy's economy. Growth has slowed down. Currently, Italy is the slowest growing EU economy. Interest rates have went up. It has negatively affected investor confidence. That's potentially affecting investment. So all those factors show that there is a need to reconsider the fiscal trajectory Italy has currently chosen.
Thank you very much. I had a question from Mark Pippercorn. Let's try to limit to one question because there's people across the room trying to ask.
Good afternoon, Mark Pippercorn, Volkskrant. I promise only one question for the Commissioners Moscovici and Dombrovskis. In November last year, you actually concluded the same, that EDP procedure for Italy was warranted. Then in December, you aborted the procedure because Italy shifted some billions within its budget, and especially also Mr. Moscovici hinted to it, because you were very afraid of the effects an EDP procedure might have on the European elections. Now we are there again. We see that in the European elections, the populist won. Lega went from 6 to 34%, and the Italian government, the Italian economy is actually in worse shape than in December. Now the question is, looking back, so with hindsight, do you think it was a mistake to stop the procedure last December?
Well, as regards last autumn, indeed, it was also our conclusion in last autumn that opening excessive deficit procedure for Italy was warranted. And it was member states, when assessing this conclusion, which called a European Commission for dialogue with Italy and for exploring the scope for Italy to actually correct its fiscal trajectory. And that exactly what has been done as a result of the discussions we had in late last year. Italy corrected its budget deficit for this year from forecasted, I emphasize forecasted, 2.4% of GDP to 2.0% of GDP. Of course, it was based on better macroeconomic assumptions of growth rate of 1.1%. Currently, we know that growth has slowed down much more considerably, and currently the forecast is only 0.1% growth, and thus a budget deficit correspondingly is higher again. It means that in any case, as I said before, there is a need for Italy to reconsider this fiscal trajectory.
La question qui était posée.
Well, I'll start in French. And I have to say, I'm going to quote Piaf, Edith Piaf here. Je ne regrette rien. I have no regrets.
Different today compared to last December. Last autumn, the dialogue between the Commission and the Italian authorities focused on fiscal plans for 2019. So it was ex ante. The 2019 draft budgetary plan, presented last October, represented a particularly serious non-compliance with the requirements of the preventive arm, which, combined with Italy's prima facie non-compliance with the debt reduction benchmark in 2017, warranted the opening of a debt-based excessive deficit procedure. However, after an intensive dialogue with the Commission, the Italian authorities amended their 2019 budget by no less than 10 billion euros. One must not forget that, putting an end to the particularly serious non-compliance planned for 2019. And the Commission thus considered that the opening of an EDP was no longer warranted at the time. This was approved by the Council, and I think this was really the right decision to take under these circumstances. The Commission's assessment presented today is different because it focuses on ex post data for 2018, which were notified in April 2019, and by definition, we didn't know those figures in last December. In 2018, as I said, Italy did not comply with the debt reduction benchmark. It also did not comply with the requirements of the preventive arm. And that's why today we are concluding that the debt criterion is not complied with and that a debt-based excessive deficit procedure is warranted for Italy. So two different situations, the right decision in December, and I also believe the right approach today. And I will be in La Hague on the 20th of June to see the Dutch Parliament, and expecting a good day, a good trip, and a nice discussion.
I'm going to take a question there from Rob from the Belgian Public Broadcaster, because I know you have a live in a minute. So.
Een vraag, question in Dutch if I may, een vraag in het Nederlands voor mevrouw Thyssen.
Question for Commissioner Thyssen. Belgium is a borderline case according to Commissioner Moscovici. Does that mean that a government has to be formed quickly in Belgium in order to be able to move away from that danger?
Wel, laat me zeggen dat het al...
Well, let me say that it's always better to have a government that has the power to act. I mean, that's good for the people. People want a solution to the problems, and in order to resolve problems, in order to implement problems and achieve results, you need to take decisions, and that's basically what a government does. And a government can only do that if they have full powers. And so it's important to have that kind of government. That means that we have a more stable partner for our talks. Now, last time when we had the country reports in the spring, we said, yes, it was borderline. What we're seeing now is that we still don't have any certainty as regards the repercussions of certain decisions that have been taken, for example, some tax reforms. But Belgium is going in the right direction in the sense that we're seeing that they are aiming at the objectives. They are going in that direction. There's a good balance. And unlike some of the other countries, the deficit is still continuing to decrease, as is the debt. So the trend, the structural trend is going in the right direction. Obviously, there's still a lot of work to be done, and it would be good if there were a full government formed soon. But no one's holding their breath, as it were. We have the history of 541 days.
Then give the rest of Europe a bit of a chance. Tommaso.
Morning, Gallavotti in Kronos, Italy. It's a question for Commissioner Moscovici, if I may. It's always on Italy because I know that Italy has a lot of problems. It should reform itself, but I've read that in a report by a Danish economist working in Italy, the UniCredit chief economist Erik Nielsen. He pointed out that the Commission gave 4 different evaluations of the output gap of Italy regarding 2017. I wonder if you think that in the Commission assessment there might be a problem of econometrics, giving for granted that Italy has a lot of problems, should reform itself, etc., etc. But these wide variations of the output gap, which is an important factor in your evaluation, I mean, it's quite stunning. Thank you so much.
I'm not going to enter into too much technicality, but since you raised this issue, I need to give a few estimates. The methodology used to estimate potential output and output gap for the purpose of fiscal surveillance was developed with and by member states and has proven to be rather robust over the years. The assessment of member states' fiscal situations is never a mechanical extrapolation of one indicator. The rules themselves foresee the need for an overall assessment and some discretion to allow for economic judgment. The output gap is thus only one part of the overall framework to determine fiscal requirements, and all relevant factors are taken into account, and that's what we did. Having said that, the output gap measurements ensure transparency and equal treatment of all countries subject to the rules of the SDP. Experts from all member states regularly discuss and scrutinize the commonly agreed methodology in the output gap working group of the Council to ensure the economic rationality of the methodology and possibly introduce country-specific amendments. Furthermore, several cross-checks with different estimation methods are in place to ensure the robustness of the Commission estimates. That's what I would say on that. Not to be too technical, I think that the Commission took into account all data which was available and all relevant factors. And again, we are ready, that's the meaning of la porta aperta, to exchange more on data if the Italian authorities want to do so.
Vice President.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple of points. Pierre already said the basic things about output gap. There is a common methodology. There is lots of discussions about this common methodology, but then it's also for member states to agree if they decide and want to change this common methodology. So far, this agreement has been evasive, this must be said, so we apply methodology as decided by member states. But what I really wanted to say is that here we are clearly beyond, if you want, nitty-gritty of output gap. We look at the main macroeconomic indicators and they are all flashing red, that we really have an issue. Budget deficit is growing, public debt is growing, growth is slowing down. So there clearly is a need to correct this fiscal stance.
Move to this side of the room briefly. We'll make our way back over. Gabriel.
Oui, bonjour, Gabriel Grésillon.
Gabriel Gazot for ECHO. My question is not to do with the one-off and the CSE, it's more CSE. Perhaps I'm mistaken, but my impression is that France has already used up all of the room for manoeuvre that they had under the pact. And they seem to be moving straight towards an exit ramp, as it were. Yes, well, since the question is in French, I'll answer in French. Yes, it's true that various of the figures are close to zero, which is not in line with the preventive dimension of the pact. Or, as regards the deficit procedure, we have to work on ex post data, so data going back to 2018, and that's the basis upon which we made the conclusion that the criteria were valid. Now, as to 2019 and 2020, there are other dates, as it were, under the rules. The draft budget will be examined in the autumn, and then the Commission will form an opinion on it. And that will be the current Commission. Structural funds for 2019 will know about those in spring 2020, and that might establish that growth is weak, but in any event, those things will be established at that point. We're not in any way at this stage talking about an exit ramp going off the highway, as it were. Rather, dramatic terminology. But as regards to structural funds for the next budget period, and as to whether they will meet the requirements under the Stability and Growth Pact, we will be examining that.
The news agent, press agency, she's been waiting quite a while.
Petra van Willersdorp, Slovenia News Agency. I have a question for Vice President Dombrovskis about Slovenia. First, I would like to ask for your comment on the lack of progress when it comes to reforms in healthcare, long-term care and pension system. And second, could you please elaborate a bit on the Commission's analysis on what areas should Slovenia focus its investment policies and why on those areas? Thank you.
Okay, so first, as regards Slovenia, indeed, as regards implementation of country-specific recommendations in Slovenia, our assessment is that Slovenia has made limited progress in addressing the 2018 country-specific recommendations, and correspondingly, some of the topics are reoccurring also in this year's recommendations. Including we have a recommendation on adaptation and implementation of reforms in healthcare and long-term care sectors that ensure quality, accessibility and long-term fiscal sustainability, as well ensuring long-term sustainability and adequacy of the pension system. So this is in this year's country-specific recommendations. As regards investment areas, our recommendations are to focus on research and innovation, low carbon and energy transition, sustainable transport, in particular rail and environmental infrastructure, taking into account regional disparities. And I would say the recommendations for Slovenia are broadly in line with our kind of general policy guidance in this set of recommendations, and so focusing also on European priorities.
Okay, Jorge.
Good afternoon, Jorge Valero. With your active, a question on Spain. I understand that today you have to communicate the positive news, but if you look at the structural deficit, which will be the crucial indicator under the preventive arm, Spain has the largest structural deficit, around 3%. According to your assessment, Spain made no efforts in 2017 and 2018, and based on the analysis of the stability program, Spain wouldn't reach the target in 2019 and 2020. So there is no reference to further measures in your assessment. You only make a reference to the Council, saying that it's the Council who calls for more measures. So my question is, based on your analysis of the stability program, whether you think that Spain has to take more measures on top of the stability program, or you are satisfied with that?
Regards Spain, indeed, Spain is now moving from excessive deficit procedure to the preventive arm of the Stability and Growth Pact. And as I already said in introductory remarks, it means that Spain would need to continue with sound public finances. And our recommendation is to ensure improvement of the structural balance by 0.65% of GDP, both this year and next year. Based on stability program, compliance with the transitional debt rule is not ensured in 2019 and 20. This is confirmed also by Commission's spring forecasts. So certainly we'll continue to follow budgetary developments and monitor the policy measures of the next government. But as regards the next steps of formal assessment of compliance with 2019 requirements and the preventive arm, it will be carried out ex post in spring 2020.
Okay, we've completed the hour. Athanasios.
question both for Vice President and the Commissioner. It seems that it's a little bit too early for Greece to be backtracking already from commitments and risking fiscal discipline and risking the hiring ceiling in the public sector by a margin of 1,550 employees. This constitutes, I think, a political problem. Do you agree that the problem is, first of all, political, and would you say that the lack of leverage from the European side is one of the factors that contributed to this such, let's say, early backtracking and lack of reform momentum and whatever is happening in Greece right now? What's your message for the next government, any next government after the elections? Thanks.
If we want to ensure that Greece successfully, so to say, stands on its own feet and successfully returns to the market financing, as I said in introductory remarks, room for maneuver is very limited. It's a delicate exercise for Greece to come back to the market financing with a debt, public debt around 180% of GDP. So there is a very limited scope for mistakes. Therefore, and this also outlined in enhanced surveillance report, it's important that Greece continues to stick with the commitments it has taken, both in terms of post-program fiscal trajectory and as regards implementation of structural reforms. And indeed, we expect difficult discussions concerning this in June Eurogroup ECOFIN.
The Commission is not supposed to enter into politics, and so I won't have that kind of judgment. I would just say that if you look at the past, you need to be a bit more objective than your question, because Greece has made a long way, first to get out of the program, and then to ensure that the reform process is on track. And again, if we look at the start of this new chapter post-program, as I said, we must see that it was globally positive, with a budgetary surplus for the third year in a row in 2018, with also return to markets, which is progressive, with also measures in order to reduce debt. And so let's say that a lot have been made by the Greek authorities to sustain the Greek economy. But we also acknowledge in this report that there are some delays and that backtracking is not the right way to move forward. And we need to see what the effects of any policy which will be led in Greece in the next months is compliant with the targets concerning the budgetary surplus to which Greece has committed when concluding the program. So whoever forms the next government will have to be in that track. We will continue to have a constructive dialogue with the Greek authorities, again, whoever runs the country, and the Commission will continue helping Greece getting to a sustainable economic situation. And so if you look at legacy, if you look at the past, you need to have maybe a broader view. The future, it's up to the Greek people to decide on the 7th of July. The Commission will always be there as a friend of Greece.
Thank you very much. Susanna, a final question that I'm able to take afterwards. Of course, we'll have the experts in the room, but have one more question to our college members.
Okay, Susanna Fresh. Is it okay? Not yet? Okay. So a question actually on Portugal, because you're mentioning here that the government should improve the quality of public finances by prioritizing road enhancing spending. So do you think public investment is disappointing, that the spending priorities are not the right ones? Is that what you mean? And specifically, how worried are you about investment in transports? Because you were mentioning here that the government should focus on railway transports? Thank you.
First of all, as regards Portugal, on fiscal recommendation in general, so it is recommended that Portugal achieves its medium-term budgetary objective in 2020, taking into account the allowance linked to the unusual events for which temporary deviation is granted. We also see that there are fiscal structural reforms which need to be implemented or continue to be implemented. And when you mention this growth-enhancing spending, yes, it means notably investment, while at the same time there is a need to strengthen expenditure control, efficiency and adequate budgeting, and also to improve fiscal sustainability of state-owned enterprises. Then, as regards investment priorities itself, as regards transport, so probably I'll just note the whole recommendation. So it's once again investment in research and innovation, railway transport and port infrastructure, low carbon and energy transition, and extending energy interconnections, taking into account regional disparities. And as you see already comparing with recommendations I just mentioned with Slovenia, and it's you could see across broader set of countries, it basically follows a number of European priorities which are outlined also in our proposal for next multi-annual financial framework as regards research and innovation, as regards efficiency of infrastructure, transport, energy infrastructure. So we are following basically the same approach. So to say, the next step on this would be discussions also as concerns programming of the EU funding in the next multi-annual financial framework.
As I said, I think 2 weeks ago, 1 week ago, 2 weeks ago, a few weeks ago, when delivering on the forecast, one thing that is impressive for the Commission is that the countries who have endured a program have now quite a substantial, if not impressive, performance as far as growth is concerned. And this is the case also for Portugal. And we must also mention this good news. Of course, a full recovery and also a long-lasting strength of the economy requires reforms. And that's what the report is about. But well, not so bad.
I'm afraid
even more than this.
I was about to let you go too early. We have one last question from Jakub from the Czech news agency in the middle. Apologies.
Do you hear me? Yeah. Jakub from Czech news agency. I take the liberty to ask something which is not directly connected to the European semester. Czech Prime Minister Andrej Babiš is using pretty strong language these days as far as audit into his alleged conflict of interest by the EU auditors is concerned. He calls the whole thing an attack on the Czech Republic, and the auditors are incompetent, according to him. So I know you usually don't comment on ongoing procedures, but I would love to hear the Vice President's ideas or feelings or comments about it. Thank you.
Okay, so concerning this issue, the audit carried out in Czechia in January and February follows the standard audit procedure, full respect with EU audit procedures, including on-spot audits, draft findings, and the right of auditee to be heard. We are in a phase of draft audit findings communicated to the Czech authorities in a form of draft audit report. And in line with the procedures, Czech authorities have been invited to react to the draft audit report. Well, as regards Commission auditors, they are professionals who always carry out their work in an objective manner in full respect of both Commission audit procedures and in line with internationally accepted auditing standards. The aim is to protect the financial interest of the EU and of taxpayers, including Czech taxpayers. The Commission always looks for cooperation and thus remains ready to work with the Czech government on the matter. We look forward to receiving an answer to the draft audit report, and only after the hearing from the Czech side, the Commission will finalize its report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice President, Commissioners. Thank you to you. We now have our experts in the room who will be able to answer your more technical questions, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Thank you very much.